The Dutch Empire. Sounds grand, doesn't it? And it truly was. But here's a fascinating thing. It all started with a rather small European nation, the Netherlands. Think windmills, tulips, and canals. Yet this tiny country managed to build a colossal global empire. It stretched across oceans and continents. This empire was incredibly important. It didn't just change maps. It reshaped global trade, finance, and even art for centuries. Imagine that. A real David versus Goliath story in world history. It really did change the world. Now, let's whisk ourselves back to the Dutch Golden Age. This was primarily the 17th century. It was when the Netherlands truly sparkled on the world stage. They became a massive world power. How on earth did they manage it? Well, largely through incredible skill in trade and shipping. Their ships, sturdy and efficient, were absolutely everywhere. They were like the internet of their day, connecting distant lands and cultures. This astonishing wealth didn't just fill pockets. It also fueled an amazing explosion in art, think Rembrandt, and in scientific discovery. So where did this global power reach? Their empire stretched far and wide, a network of bustling trade. Think of those precious spices from Indonesia, then famously known as the Dutch East Indies. Nutmeg, cloves, pepper worth more than gold. They established crucial trading posts in Japan, a very exclusive arrangement at the time. They controlled lucrative sugar plantations in the Americas. They had footholds in Africa. And did you know, they even founded a little place called New Amsterdam? You might know it better today as New York City. Their influence was genuinely worldwide. A huge part of this success story was a company called the VOC. That stands for the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, or the Dutch East India Company to you and me. Founded way back in 1602, this was no ordinary business. Oh no, the VOC was a trailblazer. It was the world's first multinational corporation, and it had powers you wouldn't believe. It could build forts, maintain its own armies and navies, and even wage war. It could make treaties with foreign rulers. It was almost like a state operating within the Dutch state. This company powered so much of their early explosive expansion. For a good while, the Dutch Navy really did rule the waves. They were innovators in shipbuilding. Their vessels were fast, maneuverable, and well-armed. Their sailors were renowned for their skill and toughness. This formidable naval power was absolutely essential. It protected their convoys of merchant ships, laden with valuable goods, as they sailed across the globe. It also allowed them to project military force thousands of miles from their home ports in Europe. They fought many fierce battles to establish and maintain this maritime dominance. It was the backbone of their empire. But as often happens in history, rivals began to emerge. Britain, another island nation with ambitions on the sea, started to challenge Dutch supremacy. This led to a series of conflicts known as the Anglo-Dutch Wars. These were incredibly fierce struggles, fought mainly at sea, throughout the latter half of the 17th century. Gradually, bit by bit, Britain's Royal Navy grew stronger and more powerful. The Dutch found it increasingly difficult to keep up with the sheer scale of British shipbuilding and resources. Losing naval supremacy was a very serious blow indeed. Their vital trade routes became much less secure. The Dutch economy was a marvel of its age, but it was very heavily reliant on trade. They were truly master merchants, brilliant innovators in finance. Amsterdam became the undisputed financial capital of the world. Banks, stock exchanges, many modern financial tools were honed there. However, this intense focus on trade, while making them incredibly wealthy, also made them vulnerable. If global trade patterns shifted, or if commodity prices fell, or if powerful new rivals emerged, the Dutch economy felt the impact very directly. Their domestic agricultural and industrial base was relatively small compared to some other nations. And then, there was the VOC, that once mighty engine of commerce. Like many giants, it eventually began to stumble. The Dutch East India Company became too large, too unwieldy, and too bureaucratic. Worse still, corruption became a serious problem within its ranks. Its profits dwindled, and its debts mounted. Eventually, in 1799, the VOC went bankrupt. This was a colossal symbolic and financial loss for the Netherlands. Meanwhile, other European powers, particularly Britain and France, were learning fast. They were building their own powerful trading empires, directly competing with Dutch interests across the globe. The economic weather was definitely changing. Internally, the Netherlands itself had a rather complex political setup. It was a republic, which was quite unusual in an age of powerful monarchies. It consisted of 7 provinces, each with a fair degree of autonomy. While this system had its strengths, it could also lead to problems. Different provinces often had their own distinct interests and agendas. This sometimes made quick, unified decision-making quite difficult. In times of crisis, when swift action was desperately needed, this internal fragmentation wasn't always ideal, especially when facing strong, centralized kingdoms like France or Britain. Achieving complete unity could be a real struggle. The Netherlands, due to its location and its role in European trade, was often caught up in the major European wars. These conflicts could be incredibly disruptive and costly. The Napoleonic Wars, at the turn of the 19th century, were particularly devastating. France, under the ambitious Napoleon Bonaparte, actually occupied the Netherlands. This had dire consequences for their empire. Many Dutch colonies were cut off from the homeland. Some were even seized by the British, who were at war with Napoleon. These wars drained Dutch resources, disrupted their trade, and significantly weakened their international standing. Another interesting factor was the pattern of Dutch colonization. Unlike some other imperial powers, such as Britain or Spain, the Dutch didn't usually send vast numbers of their own people to settle permanently in their colonies. Their colonial presence often consisted of a relatively small group of administrators, soldiers, and merchants. This meant that Dutch culture and language didn't always take deep, widespread root among the local populations. It also meant there was often less of a local Dutch population to bolster their rule or resist independence movements when these challenges eventually arose. Their control, in some areas, was perhaps a bit thinner on the ground. A powerful new force began to stir within the colonies themselves: nationalism. People living under Dutch rule started to develop a stronger sense of their own identity. They began to dream of independence and self-governance. In Indonesia, the most prized possession of the Dutch Empire, a particularly strong nationalist movement grew. Charismatic leaders like Sukarno emerged, inspiring people to demand freedom. They wanted to rule their own country, free from colonial control. This passionate desire for self-determination was a formidable force, a new kind of challenge that the old European empires were ill-equipped to handle effectively. The Second World War delivered a seismic shock to the colonial system. For the Dutch Empire, the impact was catastrophic. Japan, an Asian power, swiftly invaded and occupied the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, in 1942. This military defeat shattered the carefully cultivated myth of European invincibility. It demonstrated to the Indonesian people that their Dutch rulers could be beaten. When the war finally ended in 1945, Indonesian nationalists, led by Sukarno and Hatta, seized the moment. They boldly declared independence. The Dutch naturally tried to regain control, leading to a bitter and protracted conflict. Beyond the battlefields, the entire world's attitude towards colonialism was undergoing a profound transformation. After the horrors of World War II, the very idea of empires and colonies began to seem outdated, unjust, and unsustainable. The newly formed United Nations became a platform for championing self-determination for all peoples. Crucially, the new global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were both, for their own different reasons, opposed to the continuation of old-style European colonial empires. This growing international pressure made it increasingly difficult for countries like the Netherlands to justify holding on to their overseas territories. The end, when it came for the core of the empire, was hard-fought. Indonesia finally achieved its independence in 1949, but only after a painful war and significant international diplomatic pressure. This was, by far, the most significant loss for the Dutch Empire. Other colonies followed suit over the subsequent decades. Suriname, in South America, gained its independence peacefully in 1975. The vast global Dutch Empire gradually dissolved. What remains today as part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands are a few Caribbean islands like Aruba, Curaçao, and Sint Maarten. The era of global Dutch dominance was well and truly over. What a remarkable journey it was, from tiny nation to world power and back again.